He touched my collar with 2 fingers. That was all. 2 fingers. A gesture so small it barely happened. But in that empty hotel corridor at 3 a.m. in Seoul, South Korea, with my heart still hammering from what had just happened and his eyes moving over me like he was checking for damage he personally could not afford, that small thing cracked something open in me that I have not been able to close since. He said my name. Just my name. Like it was the first word of a language he had decided, quietly and without announcement, to learn. Then he walked away. And I stood in that corridor alone, back pressed against the wall, soul humming its enormous indifferent life somewhere above me, and I said to myself, Amara, you are in so much trouble. I was not wrong. My queens, welcome back to another irresistible Mafia romance story. I missed you. Before we start, tell me in the comments where you're watching from so I can say hi. I love knowing where my girls are. And if you're new here, don't forget to like, share with your friends, and subscribe. Stay with me, because it's about to get intense. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the real beginning, we will get to that. But the beginning of the night that changed everything. Because before that corridor, before those 2 fingers on my collar, before a man who had spent his entire life being unmoved looked at me like I was moving everything, there was a conference room, a contract, and a takeout container of jollof rice that started a war neither of us planned for. My name is Amara Hote. I am Nigerian. I am a forensic accountant. And I did not go to Seoul to fall in love. I went to Seoul to find the truth buried in a spreadsheet. Those 2 things should have had nothing to do with each other. Should have. I arrived at Incheon Airport on a Wednesday morning and Seoul hit me all at once, the skyline, the scale, the cold, clean air that tasted like a city that took itself seriously. I had 48 hours notice, 1 encrypted hard drive, for containers of my aunt's pepper soup paste, and a signed contract that gave me full access to the financial records of the Shin Grand Hotel Group. 6 hotels. 12 subsidiaries. 1 client my firm's senior partner had described as high profile and important, and had very deliberately not described as anything else. I found out why on day 1. The hotel was extraordinary. 40 floors of glass and money in the heart of the city, the kind of building that costs so much to exist you felt it in your chest when you walked through the doors. My room was beautiful. My assigned office was a storage cupboard with 1 flickering light that buzzed every 40 seconds like something small and trapped. I looked at it for 3 seconds. Then I picked up my bags, walked to the 2nd floor conference room, the one my contract outlined clearly on page 4, clause 2 as being within my full access rights, and I set myself up there instead. The hotel manager followed me down the corridor talking rapidly. I showed him the contract. He stopped talking. My father used to say, your rights don't shrink just because someone is standing in front of them. You just have to be willing to stay where you are standing. I spread my files across that conference table. I opened my laptop. And I immediately noticed that the financial records I had been promised would be prepared and waiting were not prepared and not waiting. System delay, I was told. Everything would be ready tomorrow. I wrote it down. I circled it twice. Honest companies don't have system delays before an audit. Scared companies do. And scared companies are always scared for a reason. I had been working for 3 hours when the door opened. I heard him before I saw him, not his footsteps, which were quieter than a man his size had any right to produce, but the change in the room. The way the air rearranged itself. Some people enter a space and fill it. This man entered a space and owned it, immediately and completely, the way certain things simply are what they are without announcement. I looked up. He was tall, broad-shouldered in a way that a very expensive suit was working hard to contain. Dark hair, sharp jaw, eyes that were doing several calculations at once and arriving at conclusions I couldn't fully read. He looked at my files covering his conference table. He looked at my takeout container of jollof rice from the West African restaurant I had found 30 minutes from the hotel. He looked at my reading glasses. He looked at me. This room is not available, he said. I reached across the table without getting up and slid page 4 of my contract toward him. Tapped clause 2 with 1 finger. Looked back at my spreadsheet. 15 seconds of silence. I counted. 15 seconds of a man holding a piece of paper that said, in the clearest possible legal language, that he was wrong. He set it down. He left without another word. I listened to his footsteps disappear down the corridor. Then I exhaled. But my hands were not entirely steady, and I told myself that was just adrenaline. The very reasonable, completely professional, absolutely nothing personal adrenaline of a woman who had just held her ground in front of the most arresting person she had ever seen in her life. Liar, said something quiet in my chest. Shut up, I told it. His name, I found out from the hotel porter who had taken pity on me by day 2, was Jae-won Shin. The porter's name was Sung-ho. He had kind eyes and a nervousness about him that didn't belong in this building, and over broken English and Google Translate, we had built the kind of quiet friendship that only exists between two people who are both slightly out of place in the same room. Jae-won Shin, Sung-ho told me carefully in the way you tell someone something that is also a warning, owned the hotel. All 6 of them. And considerably more besides. I had already suspected something like that. What the financial records were showing me, the ones that had finally, reluctantly appeared 2 days late and clearly curated, told the story of a business that had been structured by someone extremely intelligent who wanted the real picture to be completely invisible to anyone looking at the surface. Shell companies. Subsidiary chains. Clean legitimate income sitting on top of something else, like a beautiful tablecloth over a table you are not supposed to look under. I was professionally trained to look under tables. The freeze-out started the morning after our first meeting. System access revoked. Staff who had been warming to me suddenly couldn't meet my eye. Documents back in internal review. Every door I had been approaching quietly and carefully closed, locked, bolted. I sat down, made a list, and went around every single obstacle one by one. I am my father's daughter. We do not stop. We do not reroute. We find another way through, and we keep moving, and we do not stop until the truth is sitting on the table in front of us where it belongs. By the end of that day, I had more useful information from Sung-ho's careful nervous fragments and my own pulled access logs than I would have had from a week of full cooperation. I worked until midnight. The hotel moved around me, staff changing shifts, the lobby cycling through its late evening quiet, and I sat in my pool of conference room light and pulled the threads. At 12:30, I stepped into the corridor for water. There was a silver tray outside my door. 1 cup of coffee, perfectly made, exactly the temperature and strength I preferred. No note. No explanation. I had never told anyone in this building how I took my coffee. Not once. I picked it up slowly and looked at the security camera in the corner of the ceiling for a long, quiet moment. Somewhere in this building, behind a door I hadn't found yet, someone was paying far more attention to me than I had realized. And instead of feeling afraid, which is absolutely what I should have felt, I felt something else entirely. Something warm and inconvenient and completely uninvited that I refused to name for another 4 days. I drank every drop of that coffee. The summons came on day 5. A formal note from his assistant. Mr. Shin requests your presence at your earliest convenience. Top floor. I translated this accurately as come now. I went. But I took the time to change into my best blazer first. Because if Jae-won Shin was going to try to reduce me in whatever architectural monument to power he used as an office, and he was absolutely going to try, he was going to do it while I looked immaculate. The elevator opened onto a space designed to make you feel small. Vast, cold, all steel and glass and deliberate emptiness. Floor-to-ceiling windows with sole 40 floors below like a map of itself. And at the center of it, standing with his back to me looking at his city, Jae-won. He let the silence sit. I let him let it sit. Then he turned. Crossed to the desk. Slid an envelope toward me. I opened it. Looked at the check. Looked at him. The audit will be concluded satisfactory, he said. Full fee paid plus what's in your hand. Everyone benefits. I looked at that check for a long time. Long enough to feel the weight of it. Long enough to hear my father's voice the way I always hear it quietly, certainly, from somewhere just behind my left shoulder. Your name is the only thing in this world that truly belongs to you, Amara. Guard it like it is all you have. because one day it will be. I slid the check back across the desk. I don't sell my name. The room went very quiet. He looked at the check sitting between us. Then he looked at me, really looked, the way he hadn't allowed himself to look before, and something shifted in his face that had nothing to do with the money. Something that looked, if I was reading it correctly, like the very beginning of respect from a man who had not expected to find anything here worth respecting. He dismissed me. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and turned back to look at him once, just once, as the doors opened. He was still watching me. The doors closed. And I stood in that elevator with my back against the wall and my eyes closed and my heart doing something I had given it very clear instructions not to do. It ignored me completely. That night someone searched my apartment. I knew the moment I opened the door. Nothing obvious, no drawers pulled out, no visible mess. Whoever did it was professional and careful and very good at leaving things almost exactly as they found them. Almost. My files were a fraction out of order. The chair was at a slightly different angle. A particular stack of printed records I had arranged in a specific sequence had been replaced just one page wrong. To anyone else it would have been invisible. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. Let the information land. Let myself feel the full weight of what it meant, that I was being watched, that I had found something real enough to frighten someone, that I was 8,000 kilometers from home in a city I had arrived in 6 days ago, and the walls were closer than I had let myself acknowledge. Then I called my mother. She asked how Seoul was. I told her it was beautiful. I told her the hotel was extraordinary and the food was incredible, and I had found a West African restaurant 30 minutes away that made jollof rice that was not as good as hers, but was doing its best. She laughed. She told me to wear my coat. She prayed over the phone for 4 minutes without stopping, and I sat on the edge of the bed and let her voice fill the room and anchor me to something solid and real. I hung up, opened my laptop, encrypted every file, backed everything up to 3 separate cloud locations, and kept working. I was scared. I will not pretend I wasn't. But fear has never once in my life packed my bags for me. And it was not going to start in Seoul. On the security monitor across the hotel, J1 watched the footage of me returning to my room. He watched me pause in the doorway, watched me scan the room, process it, understand it. Watched me sit down on the edge of the bed and make a phone call and laugh at whatever was said on the other end. Watched me hang up and open my laptop and keep working. He watched for a long time. He didn't say anything to anyone. He just watched. The small moments came next. The ones I told myself meant nothing. The ones that meant everything. He passed the conference room at midnight and saw my light on. He didn't come in. A few minutes later, a staff member appeared with a fresh coffee. I looked at the security camera. Said nothing. Drank it. I was on a call with my supervisor in Lagos, Mr. Adeyemi, a man who had never once in his career chosen truth over comfort, and he was telling me to wrap the audit, file it clean, come home. The client was important. The relationship mattered. I should be practical. I waited until he finished, and then I said, very quietly, I finish what I start. Call me when you're ready to support the work. And I ended the call. I didn't know J1 was standing in the corridor outside until I looked up and saw his shadow shift under the door. It stilled, then moved on, but slower. I found Sung-ho in the lobby teaching himself an English phrase from his phone, and I sat beside him, and we spent 20 minutes going back and forth, me teaching him something in Yoruba, him teaching me something in Korean, both of us laughing at each other's pronunciation until the lobby echoed with it. It was the most genuinely human thing that had happened in that building in longer than anyone could measure. I found out later that J1 had passed through that lobby and stopped walking. I wasn't trying to get to him. I was just being myself. I think that was exactly the problem. I think he had spent so long surrounded by people performing versions of themselves for his benefit that he had forgotten what an unperformed person looked like. And I walked into his hotel being completely, inconveniently, unstoppably myself. And something in him that had been very still for a very long time woke up. I didn't know that then. I know it now. Chairman Do arrived on day 7. I was crossing the lobby when I felt it, That specific change in temperature that happens when something dangerous enters a room. I looked up and saw him immediately. Older. Silver-haired. A charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Moving through the hotel with the comfortable authority of a man who owned things without his name being on them. He was mid-conversation with two associates when he saw me. He stopped. Fully. Mid-sentence. His eyes moved over me with an interest so deliberate it had weight, not the casual glance of a man noticing someone across a room, but the measured assessment of someone who has been told about you and is now confirming what he was told. He crossed the lobby toward me. Every instinct I had, every quiet alarm that had been carefully trained by years of walking into rooms full of people who did not want me to find what I was looking for, fired simultaneously. I smiled. I kept my face warm and open and gave him absolutely nothing underneath it. You must be the auditor from Lagos. His English was smooth, practiced, the English of a man who used language as a tool rather than a means of communication. The whole hotel has been talking about you. He smiled. I'm Chairman Doe. I shook his hand and gave him my most professionally warm smile. Amara Ose. Pleasure. The pleasure is entirely mine. He held my hand a half-second longer than necessary. How are you finding Seoul? I hope we're taking good care of you. I filed that word away instantly. Pressed it flat and kept it. Seoul is wonderful, I said. Everyone has been incredibly helpful. A lie so complete and so clean that he smiled wider. If there's anything you need, he handed me a card, black, embossed, the kind of card designed to communicate power before you've read a single word on it. Please don't hesitate. J1 can be a small pause, precisely placed, difficult. I hope his mood hasn't complicated your work. There it was. Soft. Conversational. Almost friendly. J1 can be difficult. Said with the particular warmth of a man who wanted me to think he was on my side. Mr. Shin has been very professional, I said pleasantly. And excused myself. In the elevator, I let myself exhale for the first time in 5 minutes. That man frightened me in a way J1 never had. J1 was cold. J1 was controlled. But underneath J1's coldness, I had already sensed something that was not cruel, something that was defended, which is an entirely different thing. Chairman Doe had no such underneath. His warmth was a costume, and his patience was the patience of a man who had already decided what he was going to do and was simply waiting for the right moment. I did not know yet how right I was. We are deep in this story now, my queens, and I need you to stay with me because what is coming next, the rooftop, what she finds in those files, and what happens in that corridor is going to break you. Make sure you're subscribed and have your notifications on so Part 2 finds you the moment it drops. Now, let's keep going. That afternoon, Minjun, J1's second in command, a quiet, observant man whose stillness I had learned meant he was always thinking 3 moves ahead, informed me politely that I had been assigned 2 additional security personnel. Standard protocol for external contractors, he said, with an expression so carefully neutral it was practically a confession. I went directly upstairs. I walked past his assistant. Knocked once. Opened the door. J1 was on the phone. He looked up. Something moved behind his eyes, not irritation. Not quite. He ended the call. Standard protocol, I said. For external contractors. Yes. I've been here for 7 days without additional security. Protocol was reviewed. J1. His name in my mouth, direct and deliberate, and we both heard it land differently than anything else I had said in this office. I don't need you to protect me. He looked at me for a long moment. Seoul sat gray and enormous behind him, indifferent to both of us. Chairman Doe has interests in 4 of the 6 hotels you are auditing, he said. Flat. Factual. Like he was reading from a document rather than admitting something. He does not ask questions without a reason for asking them. The office was very quiet. You're warning me, I said. He turned back to the window. I'm explaining a protocol adjustment. I stood there a moment longer than I needed to. Then I turned and walked to the door. My hand was on the handle when he spoke again. Still facing the window. Still not looking at me. Your father. The one you mentioned. Did he ever finish what he started? The room tilted. I had mentioned my father exactly once. 3 sentences in passing during a conversation that J1 had not appeared to be listening to. And he had held it. Quietly, carefully, without telling me he was holding it. And now here it was returned to me like something he had been keeping safe. Every time I said. And I left. In the elevator going down, I pressed my back against the wall and closed my eyes. 6 years since my father left this world, and nobody in Seoul knew he existed. And this man, this cold, impossible, infuriating man who had tried to buy me out of his building and freeze me out of his systems and keep himself behind every wall he owned, had asked about him in the quietest, most careful voice I had ever heard him use. Like the question mattered. Like the answer mattered. Like I mattered in a way that had nothing to do with audits or contracts or the drive sitting in my pocket with his secrets on it. I told myself it meant nothing. I was already a liar and I already knew it. The power went out at 11:47 p.m. I was in the corridor heading back from the vending machine. Yes, the forensic accountant dismantling a criminal empire was getting snacks at midnight. We all coped differently when the rooftop garden door swung open on its released lock. I looked at it. I looked at my chips. I walked through. The rooftop was extraordinary. Seoul in every direction below. The city doing the work the sky couldn't. Low sculptural plants and stone benches and the kind of expensive quiet that takes a great deal of money to build into the middle of a city. I sat down and for the first time since I landed, I just breathed. You shouldn't be up here. I turned. J1 was standing at the other end of the garden. And for the first time since I had arrived in Seoul, he was not wearing his suit. Dark trousers. Dark open collar shirt. The armor gone. He looked like a person instead of an institution, and it was the most inconvenient thing that had happened to me all week, and that was a very high bar. I said, the door was open. Systems are down. He walked slowly to the other end of the bench and sat. Not close, but the same bench. We both looked at the city. The silence between us was different from every silence before. Those had been weapons. This one was just quiet. The rare, specific quiet of two people who have stopped pretending for the night. You asked me why I didn't take the money, I said after a while. I told you about my father. But I didn't ask you something. He waited. You have lawyers. You have systems. You have ways of making problems disappear that don't require you to personally sit across a table from anyone. But you came yourself. You handed me that check yourself. I turned to look at him. Why? Seoul hummed below us. A siren rose and fell and was swallowed by the city. Because I wanted to see, he said finally, what you would do. The world tilted very slightly. And? I said. He looked at me then. In the low ambient light of the rooftop with the city burning gold behind him and every wall he owned somewhere else for the night, he looked at me the way you look at something you didn't plan for and have decided, quietly and without announcement, to stop fighting. You surprised me, he said. Like a confession. Like something being set down after being carried a long way. The lights came back on. Too bright, too sudden. And, just like that, the moment cracked. He stood. Straightened his shirt. Became the institution again in 3 seconds flat. But before he stepped through the door, he paused. Hand on the frame. Back still to me. Go back to your room, Amara. Lock the door. Not a threat. A warning. I had learned the difference. I sat on that bench long after he left. The city glittered below, and I sat with the terrifying, wonderful feeling of something beginning that I had no map for. My mother always said, when something real is happening in your life, it rarely looks the way you expected. It arrives in the wrong city, wearing the wrong face, speaking a language you have to learn in real time. I pressed my hands flat on my knees. I see it, I whispered. To myself. To my father somewhere. I see exactly what this is. And I was already gone. I went back to my room. I locked the door just like he told me to. And then I sat at my desk and opened the files because I am above all things a woman who finishes what she starts, and the truth was still buried in those numbers waiting for me to be patient enough to find it. By 2 a.m. I was through the 3rd layer. And what I found there made me sit back in my chair and stare at the ceiling and not move for a full minute. The laundering was there. I had expected that. 6 hotels, 12 subsidiaries, shell companies scattered across 4 countries, elaborate but not unpredictable for someone with his resources and his world. I had been pulling at those threads for days, and I knew what they were. What I had not expected was what was sitting underneath all of it. Quiet. Almost invisible. Buried so deep and so carefully that you would miss it entirely if you weren't looking for exactly the wrong thing in exactly the right place. A secondary channel. Funds being redirected in significant amounts. And the authorization codes attached to every single transfer carried J1's digital signature. I leaned forward. Pulled the timestamps. Cross-referenced them against the access logs I had pulled earlier in the week from a system the hotel believed I didn't know existed. The authorization codes had been used at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. J1's building access showed him entering his private residence on the other side of the city at 11 p.m. that same night. He didn't leave until 7 a.m. He couldn't have authorized those transfers. He was asleep. Someone had used his codes. Someone with access to his systems, his authorization sequences, his digital identity. Someone patient enough to build this over months and careful enough to make it look seamless and close enough to be trusted completely. My hands were cold. The room was cold. I sat very still and thought about a silver-haired man in a charcoal suit handing me a black embossed card and saying, J1 can be difficult, with a warm smile of someone who already knew something about J1's future that J1 hadn't been told yet. And then I thought about a man who had warned me to lock my door, who had put security around me without admitting it, who had asked about my father in a quiet voice on a rooftop like the answer was something he needed to keep. He was being set up. He didn't know. I copied the files. 3 drives. 3 cloud locations. Then I sat with my hands flat on the desk and had the most honest argument with myself I had ever had in my life. This was not my fight. My job was to document what I found, file the report, encrypt everything and send it to Lagos and let whatever was going to happen unfold without me standing in the middle of it. That was the sensible thing. The safe thing. The professional thing. I knew exactly what the sensible thing was. I picked up the drive, put it in my pocket, and went to find him. My father's voice, quiet and certain the way it always was, Amara. You have never once in your life done the sensible thing when the right thing was standing right in front of you. I know, Daddy, I whispered into the empty room. I know. The corridor was 3 a.m. quiet, that specific stillness that belongs to the hours when even a city as enormous as Seoul briefly stops pretending. No heels. Socks on marble. The drive in my left hand and my phone in my right, and my heart doing something loud and inconvenient in my chest as I moved quickly toward the elevator. I never reached it. The first man came from the side corridor so fast and so silently that there was no time. His hand closed around my wrist before the thought of stepping back had fully formed. The second was already behind me. Expensive suits. No hotel badges. Eyes that had done this kind of calculation before and found it easy. Ms. Ose. The first man's English was precise and deliberate. Each word placed like a stone. We just need the drive. Everything in me went absolutely still. I looked at his hand on my wrist. I looked at his face. And I thought clearly, with the particular clarity that arrives only in the moments when everything is on the line, I thought, you have made a significant mistake tonight. You looked at me and you saw a woman alone in a corridor at 3 a.m. and you thought that was a simple thing. It is not a simple thing. I don't know what you're talking about, I said. Voice steady. Expression blank. A performance so complete I almost convinced myself. He tightened his grip. Not to hurt, to remind me of the arithmetic. 2 of them. 1 of me. Empty corridor. 3 a.m., 8,000 kilometers from home. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone 3 nights ago. I thought about my father at his desk in Lagos with 1 lamp and a borrowed calculator building something honest from nothing. I thought about a man on a rooftop who had looked at me in the low amber light and said you surprised me like it was the first true thing he had said in years. I tightened my fist around that drive. Let go of me, I said. Quietly. Looking directly into his eyes. Right now. He almost smiled. He didn't let go. And then footsteps. From the far end of the corridor. Fast. controlled. The sound of someone who had already been moving before the alert finished. The two men looked up and I watched something shift in their faces, something that looked uncomfortably close to the specific fear that only exists when you realize you have miscalculated who you are dealing with. J1 came around that corner like the resolution of everything. Dark shirt. No jacket. Moving with a focused, controlled precision that made everything happen very quickly and very quietly. Minjun half a step behind him, two men I had never seen before repositioning the situation in under 90 seconds. No chaos. No noise. No spectacle. Just a rapid, efficient rearrangement of the world that ended with the corridor empty and silent except for us. He crossed to me in 4 steps. His eyes moved over me immediately, hands first, then face, then the wrist that had been held. Cataloging. Checking. The particular quality of attention that says your damage would be mine. Your pain would land in me. I recognize this because I had seen it exactly once before in my life, on my father's face every time I came home from somewhere he had worried about while I was gone. I'm fine, I said. Automatic. Reflex. I know, he said. But he didn't step back. He should have stepped back. The professional thing, the sensible thing, the appropriate thing for two people who were technically on opposite sides of a financial investigation was to step back. Create distance. Reestablish the careful architecture of formality we had been constructing and dismantling and reconstructing for 8 days. He didn't step back. He reached out and straightened my collar. 2 fingers. The lightest possible touch on the fabric, barely contact, barely anything, a gesture so small it almost didn't happen. But it did happen. In that empty corridor at 3 a.m. with my heart still hammering and soul humming somewhere above us, J1 Shin reached out and straightened my collar like it was the most natural thing in the world, and I felt it everywhere. In my chest. In my throat. In the place behind my ribs where I had been very carefully not feeling things for 8 days straight. He pulled his hand back. Looked at me one moment longer, one long still moment where everything unsaid sat in the air between us like a third person in the corridor. Amara. Just that. Just my name. Spoken in a voice I hadn't heard from him before, not the cold, controlled voice of the conference room, not the careful, measured voice of the rooftop. Something underneath all of it. Something that had been there the whole time waiting for the walls to come down far enough to get out. Then he turned and walked away down the corridor. I watched him go. And I pressed my back against the wall and looked at the ceiling and let myself, for the first time since I landed in this city, feel all of it. Every single bit of it. The fear and the relief and the warmth and the confusion and the thing underneath all of it that I had been walking very carefully around for 8 days like a fire I didn't trust myself not to walk into. I pressed my hand flat against my chest. My heart was very loud. Okay, I whispered. To myself. To my father. To the God my mother had prayed over me before I got on that plane. Okay, I see it. I see exactly what this is. And I have absolutely no idea what to do about it. I went back to my room. I did not sleep. At 4 a.m., I got up and sat at the window and watched Seoul shift from black to that deep particular blue that belongs to the hour before everything changes. I thought about the drive in my pocket. I thought about what was on it. I thought about a man walking away down a corridor after touching my collar with 2 fingers and saying my name like it was something he had been holding carefully and had finally decided to put down gently. I thought about what came next. Because here is the thing about finding what I found in those files. It wasn't just evidence of a crime. It was a ticking clock. The secondary transactions, the ones carrying J1's forged signature, were not random. They were building towards something. 3 final transfers, already scheduled, automatic, set in motion months ago by someone patient enough to plan an ending before they had finished writing the beginning. In 72 hours, those transfers would execute. And when they did, Jae-won Shin's name would be attached to a financial crime so precisely and completely constructed that walking it back would take years he was not going to have. Because men like Chairman Do did not frame people and then wait politely for the legal process to reach its conclusion. They framed people and then they moved. Fast. while the person was still trying to understand what had happened to them. I sat at that window in the blue pre-dawn light, and I thought about a man who had said, "I am tired of selling my name," in a voice that sounded like someone setting down something they had carried for a very long time. And I thought, he doesn't know. He is asleep somewhere in the city right now, and he doesn't know that someone he trusts has been building his destruction for over a year, and the clock has 72 hours left on it. And I thought, I am the only person in Seoul who knows. What are you going to do with that, Amara? What are you going to do? At 5 a.m., I opened a new email to my firm in Lagos. I typed for a long time. Pages. Everything, the laundering, the secondary channel, the forged signatures, the timestamps that proved it, the trail that led directly and unmistakably to Chairman Doe. I typed until my hands ached and the sky outside was shifting from blue to the first pale gray of morning. Then I stopped, read it back, and deleted every word. Opened a new email. Typed one line. I'm not done yet. Hit send. Closed the laptop. And sat in the growing Seoul morning with my hand pressed to my chest, and my father's voice in my head, and the drive in my pocket, and the knowledge, clear and certain and not entirely comfortable, that I was about to do something that had nothing to do with auditing and everything to do with the fact that somewhere in the last 8 days, without planning it or choosing it or having any say in the matter whatsoever, I had stopped being able to separate what was right from what protected him. My mother was going to have so many things to say about this. I was going to let her say every single one of them. But first, I had 72 hours. And I was not going to waste a single one. I didn't see him the next morning. I had spent the early hours building the most complete financial picture I had ever constructed in my career. Every thread, every shell company, every forged timestamp laid out in a sequence so clear and so devastating that there was no question. No ambiguity, no room for a clever lawyer to find a shadow to stand in. Chairman Doe's fingerprints were on every layer. His subsidiary network. His access codes disguised as J1's. His patience, a year of it, mapped out in the numbers like a confession he had written himself without realizing he was writing it. 68 hours left on the clock. I needed to find J1. But the hotel moved that morning like he had never existed in it. No presence at the end of corridors, no shadow under doors, no coffee on silver trays. Minjun passed me near the elevator and gave me a look I had learned to read by now, steady, careful, the look of a man who understood that his job in this particular moment was to be patient on behalf of someone who was finding patience difficult. I understood. I kept working. But I felt his absence the way you feel a sound that has stopped, not as silence exactly, but as the specific shape of something that was there and isn't anymore. 8 days of a presence I had been pretending not to notice, and now that it was gone the pretending felt unnecessary and also too late. By midday I had confirmed everything 3 times. By 2 p.m. I had built a secondary document, clean, precise, 3 pages, that laid out not just the evidence, but the timeline. What was coming? When? What it would mean when it arrived. The kind of document you hand someone when you need them to understand something quickly and act on it faster. I put it with the drive. And I went to find him. He wasn't in his office. He wasn't in the lobby or the restaurant or any of the spaces I had learned to find him in over 8 days of watching a building that revolved around one person whether it admitted it or not. I was standing in the corridor outside his office trying to decide my next move when Minjun appeared beside me with the quiet suddenness that I suspected was a skill specifically cultivated to unsettle people. He's in the parking level, he said. Not looking at me. Looking at the middle distance the way people do when they are technically not telling you something. Thank you, I said. I didn't say anything, he said. And walked away. J1 was alone when I got there. No security. No Minjun. No architecture of staff and protocol between us. Just him in the concrete gray of the underground level, standing beside a black car, jacket off, sleeves pushed up, looking like a man who had come down here to think and had been thinking for a while without arriving anywhere useful. He looked up when he heard my footsteps. I crossed to him without slowing down and held out the drive and the 3-page document together. He took them. Read the document. all of it, standing completely still with the focused silence of a mind moving very fast underneath a surface that gave nothing away. When he finished, he looked up at me and something in his face had shifted. Not broken. Recalibrated. You could have sent this to your firm, he said. Yes. Filed it and gone home. Yes. Why didn't you? Because you listened to me talk about my father on a rooftop and told me the truth about yours. Because you put coffee outside my door and security around my movements and said my name in a corridor at 3 a.m. like it was the only word that mattered in the sentence. Because somewhere between the check you tried to give me and the collar you straightened with 2 fingers, you stopped being the obstacle in this story and became the reason I was still in it. I didn't say any of that. Because it was the right thing to do, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. The parking level was very still. The city sat above us, enormous and indifferent, 10 million people living their lives in the ordinary, extraordinary way cities live. And down here in the gray concrete quiet, 2 people stood on either side of something that neither of them had planned for and both of them had stopped pretending wasn't there. 68 hours, he said. Reading from the document. He's been building this for 14 months. Yes. His jaw tightened. Something moved through his eyes, not surprise, not quite. The look of a man who had suspected something and is now holding the proof of it, and finding that proof is heavier than suspicion even when you were already carrying suspicion's weight. Who else have you told? No one. He looked at me sharply. You came to me first, he said. Not a question. Something underneath it that was more than a question. Yes. The word sat between us. Yes. I came to you first. Before my firm, before my supervisor, before the logical, professional, sensible chain of people I should have contacted in the correct order, I came to you first. In a parking level at midday with a drive and 3 pages and 72 hours on a clock and no plan beyond getting this into your hands before it was too late. Make of that what you will. I have already made of it what I will, and I am still not entirely at peace with my conclusions. He looked at the document in his hands, then at me, then back at the document. The transactions can be stopped, he said. I have people who can move faster than his timeline. His voice was controlled and certain, a man already constructing the solution while still absorbing the problem. Doe's network, I know where the gaps are. He doesn't know that I know. That matters. And Doe himself? I asked. His jaw tightened. Also handled. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I'm going to give you in a parking lot. I almost smiled. Almost. The almost smile that had been living in my chest for 8 days found its way briefly to my face, and I watched him see it, and I watched something happen in his expression in response to it that he did not fully manage to contain. What happens to the audit, I said. Steady. Back to the work. Back to the thing I could stand on solid ground with. What do you want me to do? He looked at me for a long moment. File it accurately, he said. I held his gaze. You understand what that means? Yes. It means everything I found. I know what it means, Amara. His voice was quiet and certain and final. The voice of a man who had made a decision somewhere in the night and had arrived here already on the other side of it, already past the argument, already in the place where the decision lives after it has been made. File it accurately. All of it. Whatever comes from that belongs to me. Not to you. You don't carry any part of what I built. That was never yours to carry. My throat did something complicated. This man. This impossible, cold, infuriating, careful man who had tried to freeze me out of his building and buy me out of his life and keep himself behind every wall he owned, was standing in a parking level telling me to tell the truth about him. To file the report that would unravel the empire he had spent his life constructing. To protect my name at the cost of his own. Because I had told him once, in an office 40 floors above the city, that my name was the only thing that truly belonged to me. He had been holding that. All this time. He had been holding it, and now he was handing it back. Why, I whispered. Not professionally. Not carefully. Just the word, honest and unguarded, from somewhere underneath everything. He looked at me for a long time. The drive in his hand. The document. The city above us. 8 days of corridors and silences and coffee on silver trays and a rooftop and a collar and a name said in the dark like the beginning of something. Because you didn't sell yours, he said quietly. And I am tired, a pause, something old moving behind his eyes, something being set down with great care. I am very tired of selling mine. The parking level was absolutely still. I looked at this man standing in the gray concrete light with his sleeves pushed up and his walls finally down, and I thought, there you are. There is the person who has been living behind all of that. There is the person who listened and warned and protected and asked about my father and said my name like it was something worth saying carefully. There you are. The report took 4 days. 4 days of silence between us that was nothing like the silences before, not tactical, not armored, not the careful strategic quiet of two people protecting their positions. Just the particular silence of two people on either side of a wall that was still standing, but had stopped feeling permanent. The kind of silence that is really just a conversation waiting for the right moment. Minjun brought me lunch on the second day. Set it down without comment. Looked at me with his quiet, knowing expression and said, he doesn't sleep well. He hasn't in years. A pause. He slept last night. And left before I could respond. I sat with that for a very long time. I submitted the report on the 4th day. Full. Accurate. Every layer, every shell company, every redirected transaction, and every piece of evidence pointing to Chairman Doe as the architect with J1's accounts as the unwilling instrument. The numbers told the truth the way my father always said they would if you were patient enough to listen. My supervisor called 5 times within the hour. I answered the 5th. Amara, he said, in the voice of a man trying very hard to sound calm while being comprehensively on fire, do you understand what you have submitted? Completely, I said. This implicates everyone it should implicate. Yes. A very long silence. You're either the bravest person I've ever employed, he said finally, or the most reckless. My father would say those are the same thing, I said. I'll be home by Friday. I was packed by Thursday evening. Suitcase by the door. Room returned to the impersonal perfection it had arrived in. No trace of me left except the memory of jollof rice in a conference room and a chair that was never quite back at its original angle and 8 days of a presence that had rearranged something in this building that would not go back to how it was. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my phone. No messages. I hadn't expected one. Men like J1 don't send messages. They exist in a world where words on a screen are evidence and silence is a form of protection. I understood that. I had told myself I was fine with it. I was not fine with it. I was sitting on the edge of a hotel bed in Seoul at 8 p.m. the night before I flew home, and I was not fine with it at all, and I had run entirely out of the energy required to pretend otherwise. A knock at the door. Not hotel staff. Not Minjun's efficient double tap. One knock. Single. Quiet. Almost uncertain, from a man who I was completely confident had not been uncertain about a single thing in his entire life until approximately 9 days ago. I opened the door. J1 stood in the corridor in a dark coat, no entourage, no armor, no architecture of power around him. Just him. Looking at me with the expression of a man who had prepared something to say and was standing here now realizing that none of it was going to be sufficient. In his hand, a small paper bag. From the West African restaurant 30 minutes from the hotel. Jollof rice. I pressed my lips together very hard and looked at the ceiling for 1 second. You're leaving tomorrow, he said. Yes. The report has been received. Doe's assets are already frozen. My legal team, he stopped. Started again. The words not coming in the right order, which I understood was an experience so unfamiliar to him it was almost physical. It will be a long process. But it will be the right one. I know, I said. We stood in the doorway with a bag of jollof rice between us and 8,000 kilometers of ocean waiting on the other side of tomorrow and everything, every single thing, unsaid and present in the air between us like a weather system. I don't know how to do this, he said finally. Quiet. Direct. The most honest thing I had ever heard from a man who had spent his entire life being strategically honest only when it served him. Whatever this is. I'm not, he stopped. Jaw tight. searching in a language his life had never required him to learn. I don't know the rules of this. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I took the bag from his hand, stepped back, opened the door wider. "Come in," I said. "We'll figure it out." He looked at me for a long moment. And then, slowly, carefully, like a man crossing a threshold he has no map for and has decided to cross anyway because the alternative is a life spent on the wrong side of a door, he stepped inside. And I let it close behind him. That night we sat on the floor of a hotel room in Seoul and ate jollof rice from paper containers and talked until 3 a.m. Really talked, the kind of talking that only happens when the walls are fully down and the night is long and there is nothing left worth protecting. He told me things about his father. About the empire he had inherited before he was old enough to understand what inheriting it would cost him. About the version of himself that had existed before the weight of it had made him into something colder and more careful than he had planned to be. I told him about Lagos. About my mother's prayers and my father's desk and the particular quality of a life built honestly in a world that does not always reward honesty. About what it had cost me to walk into this hotel and refuse to leave and refuse to be bought and refuse to be frightened into smallness. About what it had cost me and what I had found instead. We didn't name what we were. We didn't make promises we couldn't see the shape of yet. We just sat in the warm, small world of that hotel room while Seoul moved through its enormous life outside the window and let something that had been building for 9 days exist without a wall around it for the first time. At 3 a.m. he stood to leave. Paused at the door. Turned back. "Amara." "I know," I said. He looked at me. Almost smiled. That almost smile I had been collecting like something rare and specific. Then he left. I sat in the quiet he left behind and pressed my hand to my chest and felt my heart loud and certain and completely done pretending, and I thought, this is not over. Whatever this is, wherever this goes, across whatever distance and complication and impossible geography, this is not over. It is not even close to over. It is just beginning. But here is what I didn't know that night. While we sat on that floor and talked until 3 a.m., while all of that was happening, while something real and unguarded and irreversible was being built in a hotel room in Seoul, a man on the other side of the city was making a phone call. Chairman Do. Sitting alone in the dark of his office. Assets frozen. Empire cracking. The patience of 14 months collapsing around him in real time. Undone by a forensic accountant from Lagos who had come to his city with an encrypted hard drive and a stubborn refusal to sell her name. He sat in the dark and he made a call to a number that did not exist on any of his known contacts. A number he had been saving for exactly this moment. Someone hidden so carefully that not even J1's considerable intelligence had found them. Someone who had been waiting. "It's time," Do said. A pause on the other end of the line. Long and still and deliberate. Then a voice calm, cold, and completely familiar to me in a way that stopped my blood. "I know. I've been watching her since Lagos." The call ended. And somewhere in the city, something that had been perfectly still began to move. My queens. "I know. I know. Don't you dare come for me. Part 2 is coming, and I promise you on everything, what happens next will destroy you in the best possible way." Who is the voice on that phone? Who has been watching her since Lagos? And what happens when J1 finds out that the danger didn't end in that corridor, it followed her all the way from home? If you are not subscribed right now, what are you doing with your life? Hit that button, turn on every notification, and share this video with every single girl in your life who deserves a good story. Drop a comment and tell me, are you Team J1 yet? Because my queen's same. I'll see you in part 2. Don't you dare leave me.